Good evening, I'm Maciej Mikos and you're watching World News Tonight live from Warsaw. American negotiators arrived in Moscow today to discuss details of the peace plan for Ukraine, as Putin says Russia is ready for a war with Europe. It comes after Moscow claimed to have taken control over the crucial Ukrainian stronghold of Pokrovsk following 18 months of siege. We'll have more on that in a moment, but first let's take a look at tonight's headlines. Poland and allies to allocate an additional 500 million euros to help Ukraine. Violence breaks out in Sofia as Bulgarians protest over the budget and corruption. And Polish president vetoes a bill regulating crypto assets. An American delegation arrived in Moscow to negotiate the terms of a peace deal for Ukraine. The U.S. team is led by Donald Trump's special envoy, Steve Witkoff, who has allegedly been coaching Kremlin officials how to successfully conduct talks with the White House. Kazimierz Wysiak has the latest updates.
U.S. officials sent by President Donald Trump came to Moscow on Tuesday for high-level talks on peace in Ukraine. The U.S. delegation, consisting of two of Trump's trusted advisors, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. The meeting starting with an exchange of pleasantries about the Russian capital.
You've had a walk around the city.
Yes, it's a magnificent city.
But any hopes for Russia accepting a revised peace plan got dashed even before the meeting began.
The Europeans put forward demands that are absolutely unacceptable for Russia, and they know it. The goal is to later blame Russia for the end of the peace process.
The original 28-point peace plan, which included major territorial concessions by Ukraine, has since been negotiated down by Kyiv and its European partners. They're once again pointing out that if Russia wants peace, it should agree to an immediate ceasefire. Instead, Russian President Vladimir Putin has war on his mind.
If Europe suddenly decides to wage war against us and starts it, we are ready right now. There can be no doubt about that.
And before the US delegation even arrived in Moscow, Putin attempted to boost his position in the negotiations. He first claimed the Russians have taken the key city of Pokrovsk in the east of Ukraine. But while this footage released by Russia shows its soldiers in the city's center, Ukraine denies the entire town has fallen to the invaders. And analysts back this up.
There are Ukrainian forces in the city, there are Russian forces in the city, they are fighting. If you look at just the Ukrainian sources, there is a lot of evidence that the Russians are taking very severe casualties.
Also on Tuesday, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov hosted his Chinese counterpart Wang Yi in the Russian capital.
I know that today is a busy, tense and significant day for Russia, yet today you still found time to meet with me. This is precisely a testament to the high level of our mutual trust and cooperation.
A show of close partnership between the two superpowers on the very same day the US delegation arrived for the talks on Ukraine.
Telling the Americans, look, we can always go to the Chinese, they'll work with us. Or Vladimir Putin saying, we have taken Pokrovsk and Donetsk after, I must remind you, a 17-month offensive to try to take a single town. Of course it's PR.
With little to none diplomatic experience between Witkoff and Kushner, the pair recently emerged as more business-oriented when it comes to bringing peace to Ukraine.
When they make deals, they're not deals in the traditional sense of this mistaken label that's being used, a peace plan. They're not like diplomatic settlements, they're not like conflict resolution. They are deals to try to make money.
Steve Witkoff was even caught on tape in mid-October, advising the Russians on how to flatter Trump to get him on board a peace deal benefiting both Moscow and Washington, not Kyiv. This has made Ukraine especially skeptical before the talks in Russia.
is no expectation by anybody that there might be that Russia might make major concessions or even minor ones.
While Russia is putting the blame on Ukraine and Europe for standing in the way of peace, Putin himself hasn't agreed to any proposal yet, even the original 28-point plan laid out by the US. For TVP World, I'm Kazimierz Łysiak.
US Secretary of State Marco Rubio will not attend Wednesday's NATO foreign ministers meeting, which will focus on the alliance's support of Ukraine moving forward. The decision comes amid concerns over Washington's wavering commitment to NATO and Ukraine. Meanwhile, Warsaw announced another financial package to help Kyiv. Our EU correspondent Alex Cadier has some more on this story.
Well, this meeting of NATO foreign ministers naturally overshadowed by peace talks in Moscow. Steve Witkoff, the presidential envoy, the president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, of course, talking with Vladimir Putin. We understand from diplomatic sources that European allies at NATO pressed the United States in the last 24 hours to get more information about these peace talks. How could it impact the future of Ukraine's sovereignty? How could it impact, crucially, European security? And there may be an impact on Poland. More on that in a minute. But of course, European powers continue commitments of support to Ukraine. We understand that Poland, alongside other countries, will commit 500 million euros in support for Ukraine when it comes to NATO's Pearl initiative. That allows allies, NATO members, to buy US equipment, military equipment, and ship it to Ukraine in short order, addressing Ukraine's priority needs. That, of course, continuing a European commitment of support for Ukraine. But naturally, a lot of the questions are about these peace negotiations. We understand, again, from diplomatic sources, a reluctance from the US side to give more information to its NATO allies. Other sources I've spoken to have said that's because these discussions are not taking part within NATO. NATO is not an active participant in these discussions. The Secretary General, Mark Rutte, saying that he is being consulted, but also added this.
Everything I say about the peace process might not be helpful, so the less I say about it, the better it is. But this is just to make sure that you understand, and that, of course, also coordinating closely with the Americans, we make sure that this is a separate issue to be dealt with.
So the less he says, the better. Mark Rutte trying to be diplomatic, keeping the alliance steady, but not addressing exactly how this may impact Europe and Central and Eastern Europe in particular. But of course, we've learned from our sources that Poland may be impacted. And for more on that, here's this report.
A NATO facility in Bydgoszcz, northern Poland, could become one of the most important bases in Europe. Instead of a joint analysis, training and education center, the facility could become a key hub for NATO forces. Diplomatic sources at NATO told TVP World that if a peace agreement between Kyiv and Moscow is reached, the Bydgoszcz facility would assume the role of support command, coordinating logistics and dispatch of allied troops. Troops from the UK, France, the Netherlands and other countries would gather at the Bydgoszcz base as peacekeeping forces for a mission on Ukrainian soil. Poland would handle all logistical aspects of the operation. Poland's involvement came as one of Ukraine's non-negotiable security guarantees for a peace agreement. Warsaw was given this role due to its reluctance to commit its own troops to a peacekeeping mission in Ukraine. Poland says it already contributes by hosting the majority of Ukrainian war refugees, as well as being the transport hub for aid flowing into Ukraine.
Kyiv has been trying to tank Russia's economy by striking its refineries and pipelines, as well as targeting its infamous shadow fleet, which secretly transports oil to distant corners of the world. Environmentalists warn that deploying such tactics in the Baltic Sea could have a devastating effect on the region. Randy Potts reports.
A ship flying the Russian flag and transporting sunflower oil reported on Tuesday it came under attack while sailing from Russia to Georgia. Turkish officials said the ship was attacked about 130 kilometers off the Turkish coast. All of the 13 crew members were unharmed. This newest attack comes just days after 2 other Russian Shadow Fleet ships in the Black Sea were sunk by Ukrainian naval drones. The fleet, which sails under multiple flags, is a worldwide network of aging ships secretly transporting Russia's oil to circumvent Western sanctions. Kyiv claimed responsibility for the first 2 attacks, but not for today's.
Ukraine has nothing to do with this incident, and we officially refute any allegations of such kind made by Russian propaganda. Furthermore, the alleged route from Russia to Georgia across Turkey's exclusive economic zone makes no sense and suggests that Russia may have staged the whole thing.
Turkish President Recep Erdogan had given an address just the day before in the capital, Ankara, decrying Ukraine's recent sinking of 2 Russian oil tankers, the Kairos and Virat.
Friday's targeting of commercial ships in our exclusive economic zone signals a worrying escalation. We cannot condone these attacks, which threaten navigational life and environmental safety, particularly in our own exclusive zone.
As Ukraine steps up its attacks on Russian shipping, environmentalists fear a repeat of last January's oil spill when 2 Russian tankers, damaged during a storm near Kerch, leaked as much as 5,000 tons of oil. Greenpeace, which monitors shipping routes worldwide, said it is concerned Ukraine might extend these attacks to another shadow fleet hub, the Baltic Sea, where an oil spill could be catastrophic.
Danish straits are very narrow and they're environmentally very important. They're nesting area for migratory birds. This is like a really, really environmentally fragile ecosystem.
Environmentalists are not the only group worried about Ukrainian attacks in the Baltic. On Monday, Estonia's Minister of Foreign Affairs suggested Ukraine's recent attacks would not be welcome further north.
About 60+% of Russia's gas and oil exports pass through the Gulf of Finland, and this is an enormous volume, especially in a corridor only about 6 nautical miles wide. We have not said don't come here, but it would be wise not to, because it really could escalate the situation in the Baltic Sea.
For TVP World, Randy Potts.
The European Central Bank is reportedly refusing to provide a backstop, a €140 billion loan for Ukraine, throwing a wrench in the European Commission's plan to mobilize frozen Russian assets. Our business editor, Jakub Kapiszewski, has more.
Time is running out for Ukraine. As the 3rd year of the full-scale invasion nears its end, Kyiv needs money, and fast. The EU wants to provide the embattled ally with a €140 billion loan using frozen Russian assets. But this plan hit a snag on Monday as the Financial Times reported that the European Central Bank would not act as a backstop for the loan.
This is a very important issue here. The ECB basically putting a knife into the back of the European Commission idea of taking of those Russian assets that have been frozen in Euroclear.
Commission representatives seemed surprised by the ECB's assessment and said talks on the issue will continue.
We are having discussions on how to ensure that this liquidity can be ensured. So we're basically looking for alternative solutions.
Involving the bank was a way to make the plan legally watertight and address the concerns raised by Belgium, where the assets are being held.
I want answers on every question I asked. I want a maximum of legal certainty. I want solidarity. I don't think this is an unreasonable position.
The ECB would only step in if Russia were to win a court case over assets handed to Ukraine and needed to be quickly repaid. Member states would still be on the hook, though, as the loan guarantees.
I don't in any way diminish the risks or the worries that Belgian government has. When we had the discussions in the European Council, I mean, everybody was saying that we are ready to shoulder the risks and the burden.
According to the Financial Times, the bank's internal assessment is that backstopping the Ukraine loan would violate EU law. A day before the story broke, Ursula von der Leyen stated that the Commission will table a legal proposal regarding the loan this week. The ambition is for the EU leaders to agree on the loan for Ukraine during the nearest European Council on December 18th. If that's not possible, a bridge loan could be provided instead.
Bulgaria's government is withdrawing its 2026 draft budget after thousands took to the streets of the capital of Sofia on Monday to protest the controversial plan, as well as the cost of living and the adoption of the euro. But is the budgetary recall enough to appease the demonstrators? Our Balkans correspondent Paweł Trzaskowski has the latest.
This is the aftermath of overnight protests in Sofia. Dozens of arrests accompanied mass demonstrations in the capital.
I believe that the detention of 71 individuals, all of whom committed unlawful actions, was done expertly.
These unlawful actions were most likely instigated by Bulgarian authorities.
What came out as a violence was actually a skillfully steered provocation conducted with the hands of the Bulgarian police forces, which brought practically football hooligans to join the protests.
This provocation was the final act of an anti-government demonstration. One of the reasons behind this opposition was next year's proposed budget.
This budget made everyone mad. The budget was supposed to be for those who really need it.
These words come from Blagomir Kotsiev, just released from police custody after almost 5 months following his arrest on corruption charges. His detention, perceived by many as unjust, added to the air of dissatisfaction in the country that reached a climax on Monday night.
People were definitely mobilized to protest against not just the budget, but by the uncontrolled exercise of power, political power.
One of the causes of this uncontrolled exercise of political power is the ruling coalition's inability to govern independently.
The problem is that this coalition is supported by the party that traditionally represents the Turkish minority in Bulgaria, that was recently taken over by the figure Pevski.
Pevski is a Bulgarian oligarch sanctioned for corruption by the US.
Bulgarians understood that Pevski has been stealing from them. He's been stealing through the budget. He's been doing it for 15 years.
Now, the protesters want the government to resign, and the country's president agrees.
There's only one way out: resignation and early elections.
The Council of Ministers eventually withdrew the controversial draft budget on Tuesday. But this move might fail to appease the protests, which no longer appear to revolve only around the country's finances, but have become a part of a larger wave of dissatisfaction. Bulgaria has been rocked by political crises for the last 5 years, with 9 different governments in place, changing roughly every 6 months. The current government, formed in January this year, has already stayed longer than average, but it may be slowly running its course. Paweł Trzaskowski for TVP World.
Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk has vowed to send back to Parliament a bill regulating cryptocurrencies. Polish President Karol Nawrocki vetoed legislation, arguing that the new regulations threaten personal freedoms. Maciej Wilowski has more.
Polish President Karol Nawrocki has vetoed a key cryptocurrency bill passed by Parliament. Had it been approved, the bill would have modified Poland's crypto laws to be in line with the EU's Markets and Crypto Assets Regulation, or MiCA rules.
The EU's regulation MiCA has allowed Polish startups, not only Polish but all European startups, to operate if they target less than 150 persons. In Polish regulation, it didn't exist.
Adding MiCA would have made Poland's already restrictive crypto regulations, as enforced by the country's Financial Supervisory Commission, even more complex.
The Polish Financial Supervisory Commission has been very restrictive about crypto, and with this act that was vetoed by the president, it was supposed to go even further.
A spokesperson for the president cited overregulation, a lack of transparency, and the regulatory burden on small businesses as reasons for the president's decision. At over 100 pages long, the document was considered too complex and burdensome. That compares with less than 10 pages for similar legislation drafted in the Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Hungary. The president was forthright in his assessment of the bill.
According to the president, the vetoed provisions pose a real threat to Poles' freedom, their property, and the stability of the country.
Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk thought otherwise and vowed to resend it to the president's desk.
Already today, 600,000 people have been harmed in the cryptocurrency market in Poland, so I don't think there is anything to think about. Please consider, Mr. President, the fact that we will immediately send out this bill once again, and it will quickly pass through Parliament.
Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski was just as critical.
The president vetoed the bill that was supposed to regulate the cryptocurrency market. When the bubble bursts and thousands of Poles lose their savings, at least they'll know who to thank.
The veto is a win for crypto activists in Poland, along with prominent far-right Eurosceptic politician and Confederation Party co-leader Sławomir Mencen, who had railed against the legislation. With the president's latest veto, the clash of opinions between the president and the governing coalition shows no signs of abating. Maciej Wilowski for TVP World.
U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and President Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner came to the Russian capital on Tuesday in an attempt to reach a consensus in peace negotiations over Ukraine. And to talk about it, we're joined by Diane Francis, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council. Good evening.
Good evening.
So what do you make of the sheer composition of the American delegation to Moscow? Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner are trying to broker a peace deal for Ukraine.
Well, you have two businessmen, two real estate developers, talking to a war criminal. And then, excuse me, there's also a Russian businessman there, Dmitriev. So it's 3 against 1. And as I think your leader, Tusk, said, this is about business, not about a peace deal.
Mm-hmm. Now, talking about business, why is Washington so reluctant to inform Europe on peace talks' progress? Because, for example, Marco Rubio will not attend tomorrow's meeting of NATO foreign ministers in Europe.
Well, I think the problem is that the two sides are absolutely in disagreement about 3 things. First of all, the surrender of some territory that Russia hasn't conquered in Ukraine as a settlement, the capping of the size of its military, and the fact that it can't be part of NATO or NATO can't help it. There's no security guarantees in here for Ukraine either, which is an absolute necessity. And so, you know, if you can't find a middle ground between those 4 issues, there's not going to be a deal. In fact, there can't be a deal unless someone is convinced by other reasons, and that could have to do with money or deals or whatever. But you know, this is supposed to be a peace deal.
In this context, what is the significance of the Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi's visit to Moscow just hours before the American delegation's arrival? Was it a deliberate, a warning gesture, or is China trying to convince maybe Vladimir Putin to agree to American demands?
I would love if that were the case, but in fact, it's more like Putin. You know, he summoned Orban to come for a little summit so he could badmouth Ukraine and praise Putin. This is going to be the same kind of thing, although I don't think the Chinese will badmouth Ukraine. Their position has been, you know, the war should end amicably, which is quite impossible. No, I think they're there to plump up the stature of Putin, whose economy is starting to crater and his army is not very good because it's not getting very far very fast.
Mm-hmm. Now, we know that Russia's economy is in quite bad shape, but Russia, on the other hand, tries to portray the situation on front lines as a catastrophe, an absolute catastrophe of Ukraine's soldiers, and it claims that it has conquered the city of Pokrovsk. Now, have Russian negotiators already convinced Washington that Ukraine's defeat is imminent?
Well, that's been their take on it all along. You can't win, so why don't you just give up what we want right now, and then it all goes away. But without security guarantees, and because you're dealing with a maniacal regime like Putin's, you can't trust that they're not going to invade again. And also, I've been looking at the research, the Pokrovsk boast by Russia that they've taken the city, and that this is some kind of an example of the front line falling apart from the Ukrainian point of view, doesn't seem to be true. First of all, it isn't falling apart because Pokrovsk has lost its usefulness to supply chains for the military months ago when they started battering it. But Russian military bloggers, those that have credibility, say that it's not true, that they haven't, taken over Pokrovsk. They've taken over some of the ruins in Pokrovsk, but it's propaganda designed to undermine Ukraine's argument and Europe's argument that this war has to stop. I mean, it has to come to a halt now.
About undermining Europe's position, we have a little quote from Vladimir Putin. They are on the side of war, and if Europe suddenly wants to fight us and starts the war, we are ready right now. Are Putin's efforts to portray Europeans as warmongers successful across the Atlantic Ocean? Could he succeed in driving a strong wedge between the NATO allies?
No, not at all. In fact, the Americans don't think they're strong enough militarily, and neither do most European leaders, led by, of course, Poland, which is strong. But Germany now has come up with a war plan. It's taking this very seriously. The British always did, and the Baltics and the frontline countries always did. No, I think part of the reason for that message was, as you say, maybe wedge, an attempt to wedge the alliance between the two. But I think it's really it's a scaremongering tactic. It's, you think we're not going to go at war? You think you can go at war against us? We're already ready, and you're not. And that's what he's saying. And so that's another reason to unsettle the side of those of us who are with Ukraine into thinking Russia is just so strong and never will stop. And you better give it what it wants, whatever it wants, or else, this continues. Mm-hmm.
Now, Ukraine is attacking the Russian shadow fleet, as we've informed in our previous report. Now, is this the sort of economic pressure combined with inland attacks on Russia's energy sites weakening the Kremlin's position in peace negotiations enough to make Vladimir Putin reconsider his position on Ukraine?
Well, I think there's about 100 oil tankers that have to sink before he'd capitulate. I think you have to dry up the entire supply chain of his energy. And one of the things I might say is that, and I've just written it, is that, when you blow up an oil tanker, you create environmental problems and sometimes problems for a peaceful country who's sure that it's been blown up beside. I think a far better strategy is for the European Union to just simply impound every shadow fleet vessel that goes up and down its waterways, and they all do. Just impound them. Just make them go in port and stay there and not deliver. That doesn't necessitate bombs and environmental oil spills, but I think that's something that Europe should be doing now.
But wouldn't that be totally in accordance with international law? Because you first have to prove that these vessels actually belong to Russia.
Well, you can make them stay in port, and you can have the paperwork take months while you try and get to the bottom of the ownership. I mean, come on, we can't be the Boy Scouts and they're the devil. I mean, he has blown through every international law, every human rights violation, every war crime. He doesn't care. He's not going to care about that. Meanwhile, on the Western side, people are concerned about, will they sue us if we give the frozen Russian assets to Ukraine as reparations? Well, that shouldn't even be a case. Just take it. That's it. Be ruthless. There has to be, we have to get tougher, because this guy is playing us. He's playing through all the loopholes he can.
And now, according to unofficial NATO diplomatic sources, the Polish city of Bydgoszcz will serve as the main logistics hub for the coalition of the willing forces to be deployed in Ukraine. I'm talking about the coalition of the willing forces. Although Warsaw will not be sending its own peacekeepers there. So Is this enough, in your opinion, to place Poland as one of the European leaders in supporting Ukraine?
Well, first of all, we don't know whether there'll be a coalition of the willing boots on the ground from any European country allowed inside Ukraine, because that seems to be one of the sticking points with Putin. He doesn't want any of them there. And the French and British have said they were happy to do that. And that's probably why Poland doesn't have to add to the mix at this point, because the British and the French have more or less committed to that. And having it, of course, having a station in Poland is essential. You're on the front line, and you have all of the military capability and logistical knowledge and supply chain necessary for that. But I think that we're coming to a point. We're going to find out in the next 24 hours or so whether the Ukrainian-American alternate plan is going to go anywhere with Russia. And I'm pretty pessimistic, but let's hope I'm wrong.
Diane Francis, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, was our guest this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching and stay with us for more news and interviews here on TVP World.